Welcome to the Futures Forum Live online, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. On this edition of the Futures Forum Live, we exchange ideas, information, education, and inspiration about the future of Black America. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get Futures Sense now. Share this story and share our future. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Futures Forum Live, an online easing of the Futures Forum, where we discuss things that are in an emerging landscape of the future. Now, February is Black History Month in the United States of America, and so we decided to have a conversation on the future history of Black America. Specifically, I wanted to examine exactly how being Black in the American context might be in the year 2030 and beyond, because as we know, all the countries around the world are looking at 2030 as a pull year for making transformational change. One of the issues we'll be talking about is Sustainable Development Goal 10, which talks about inequality. In the US, this is relevant because by 2030, it is said that America will be a majority-minority country, meaning that majority of people who are minorities by race and ethnicity will be American. And in that context, people of African descent may very well be the second largest minority. So Hispanics will be the largest minority, and then people of African descent. So in this episode, I will be speaking with Linda HAITHCOX Taylor, who is Executive Director of the National Policy Alliance, which is a leadership of 8 African-American nationally elected official organizations, including, for example, the National Council of Black Mayors. It also includes Blacks in Government and the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. These organizations together represent over 11,000 elected officials of African descent. So it's a really great person to help us understand what her view and hopefully some of the people who are her constituent stakeholders might be thinking about the future of Black America. So welcome, Linda HAITHCOX Taylor. Greetings, how are you?
Hi, Dr. I am doing just fine. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So I'm so pleased you could take the time to speak with me today. Now, you heard me talking about 2030 as a pull year, an idea of people and countries and nations around the world looking at different issues from gender to water to energy. And a big goal, SDG 10, is the one of inequality. Now, your organization is made up of elected officials mostly, whose function it is to create policy and programs and projects aimed at satisfying their constituents. Now, let me start off by saying, not all of them represent majority-minority districts, right? We know, but quite a few of them represent either rural or urban American areas where the majority of the communities are underserved minorities. So help me, from your point of view, understand just how, given in this election in particular, are people thinking about the future? Not this election, but how are they thinking about why are they running now to create what future? What are they seeing as the future of the American dream to which they might aspire?
Well, first let me say that I am happy to say that 12,000, that 11,000 number is really more like 14 at this point. So I'm really happy to announce that we certainly got quite a few new elected.
I'm not hearing you so well. Could you bring up your speaker, please? Yeah.
Okay. That we were able to win quite a few new elections within the last election period, and I'm sure that's going to continue to happen. Now, as it relates to what the people are thinking, what are policymakers thinking? Think about it this way: we're 3 elections off, 3 presidential elections off from 2030.
Yes.
If for any unusual whatever circumstances, this current president makes it through to a second term, now we're talking 2 elections from 2030. So essentially, policymakers, no matter what their level, whether it's a national or state or county or city, they have to have some kind of plan to say, this is what I visualize, this is what needs to happen in my community. We have done, and when I'm saying we, sadly, I'm speaking of African Americans, we have spent so many decades trying to assimilate, trying to, be like everyone else and have the great American dream, that we don't think about the future. Policymakers are in an awkward position because part of their job is to improve communities. That's supposedly what they desire to do, and to make their community, the communities they represent, to make them better. Education, housing, healthcare, and on and on. So
exactly. So when you look, let's take one, for example. When we talk about the future of inequality from a UN perspective, they're talking about things like income, making sure that you're empowering the bottom half with social, economic, and political inclusion. So we see that there's, let's maybe spend this time, we only have half an hour, talking about those 3 issues, right? But let's take the ones that are really critical. We already have some level of political inclusion, but by 2030, what does social inclusion look like in terms of, let's say, the education system, right? Education system requires us to prepare for a workforce that will be entering a space where robots and automation are going to decimate a lot of the quote-unquote jobs that were done before by unskilled workers.
Well, yeah? we don't have a choice as it relates to education, because if you're not educating your population, giving them the opportunity to have their own businesses, they could be a company that manages or owns these robots or these electronics that are going to, improve our overall being. But education is essential. But what I do see happening, and I think all of us will agree, that we have to go back to skills building. We have to. It is not, at this point, somehow education has evolved into just, a pass and fail situation. But no, you see young people come out of school with no skill. So that is one of the areas that I believe is going to emerge more. It is coming out now, but it's going to emerge more and more.
So do you foresee then that some of these policymakers would say, okay, set as a standard that we want to see in our high school systems, for example, right? Technical schools or skills-based schools in the community colleges or in the high schools, so that you really are focused on driving an agenda. And is there the budget, is there the support and the budget support to make that decision now? And do we have a vision of what that could look like? What is the high school?
Well, the vision is really easy, because believe it or not, that's what high schools used to do. When I graduated from high school, all of the schools, and I'm from Chicago, all of these schools had, you didn't come out of high school until you had some kind of, I don't care what it was, typing, wood shop, electrical, mechanical, that was the norm. And so the school systems, many of them, almost all of them, removed those curricula from their normal school program, and they became these outside private-owned technical schools that you have to pay to learn those skills. I believe that it's going to open back up, because it has to.
Yeah, because you think that's where the jobs are going to be. Because when we talk about, let's take the transportation sector, for example, right?
Okay.
We know that there is going to be a dislocation. At least they're saying there's going to be a dislocation because of autonomous drivers, right? Automated auto driving. Now, I'm not sure if policy-wise that will happen, because, for example, there's no need to say we have to have self-driving cars because they exist, or self-driving trucks. But with all that those jobs for, again, low-skilled workers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, right? And these other companies. How do you see, what will those people be doing? What kind of work do you foresee that communities of color can make a decision? We see that we're going to have more people dislocated. How are we going to mop up those people so they don't end up being warehoused in prison? What kind of decisions do we ought to be taking now?
Well, I think, again, going back to either the skills building in the schools, that is certainly one. And the second, and I hate to reference it this way, but this is real, you know, populations are going to, the baby boom generation by then will be 80, 90 years old, and probably a significant portion of that population will no longer be living. Therefore, you have a smaller population of millennials, of, I forget the Generation X and Y and all that. So the population will shrink. It is smaller than the baby boom generation. But to that point, what will they be doing? It's gonna be rough. But you still, you can't have a machine that's going to, you know, put down roads and bridges. That just, there are humans that are going to still have to do things. You know, whether it's the food industry, produce, growing crops or whatever. You still have to have human. I mean,
I'm laughing because I was going to say that's actually a false assumption. To my shock and horror, I was doing some research and I found out that there are automatic grape picking machines. I'm like, automatic grape picking machines? Yeah. Are you serious? Yeah. What are they doing? I thought that that's going to be the one job that will be left for humans to do, because, you know, you want tender hands to gently pick the grapes so don't bruise them. So I was in shock. So look at the future of work, right? From the vantage point of work. Do you think then that, or let me rephrase that, how do you think we can get elected officials better prepared to focus on creating policy? First of all, to think about policy that will help to create the education and social infrastructure necessary to prepare that in 10 years, because 2030 is just 12 years away. It's not that far. Right. So anybody that has a 15-year-old child now has to be worried about what they'll be doing in 10 years. 25 is not that far. How do we get these officials, many of whom are there for 10, 15, 20 years, to see that they really are not the politicians of the 1980s, but the 21st century requires a new thought pattern around making decisions for change?
Well, let's say that if that policymaker represents, we'll just say, a urban area, urban city, there is no way that they can expect to retain their position, their leadership role, if they are not thinking about the future. I just can't imagine that any policymaker at any level would be negligent of thinking about, if they're looking at their district, their city, their whatever, their county, and saying, what is it that we need? Well, if your roads are bad, you've got to improve your roads. Well, where do you get the money from? So this is kind of a full circle thing, because in order for you to improve your community, you have to have the dollars. Where do the dollars come from? Taxes. Where do the taxes come from? People who have jobs who are paying into the city, into the system. So if there are not enough jobs, you don't have enough taxes, you don't have enough infrastructure, then that road doesn't get fixed. And so then that community deteriorates, and now that policymaker has to sit there and go, oh my God. So I'm going to use, this is a terrible example, but it's the perfect example.
Yes, I think so.
Detroit, look at the city of Detroit and others that have had to bankrupt themselves, that have had to essentially collapse down to a skeleton of a city, and your tax base is just nothing what it used to be, but nonetheless you have to operate, you have to take care of the population that's there, and you have to plan for the future.
So could not a city like Detroit be actually used as a experimental state to create new thinking about the future? In other words, should we not be getting our best thinkers together, right, to say, here are opportunity of a dying city that's kind of trying to be reborn. Let's find maybe two others, right, and really create an experimental, intentional community that looks at new economic models, new political models that get people engaged. And talking about politics, I see a rise in interest, and you alluded to that earlier, of Blacks in local level politics as an antidote to what I'm calling Trumpism, right? Now, given that there's a new belief that, okay, anybody can win politics these days, and the standards seem to be quote unquote lower, right, for entry. Do you think that in the next 10 to 15 years, we will see more Blacks running for office? And given the use of data, right, big data, to gather information on people, to manipulate information, do you think that the systems or the guards are in place to ensure that the system does not preclude or prevent a rising growth of Blacks from entering the space?
Well, we know, and this has been going on since Black people have been in this country, which obviously is a long time. We know that we have been restricted or not given the same opportunities, particularly to financial resources. So if I'm a young Black person, whether I've gone to college or not is actually not important at this point. But let's say I have a concept for business. The first thing I have to do after I draft out my concept is find financial resources. That is the single area that, whether it's a policymaker or anyone else, that the Black people have the greatest challenge. I'm going to tie that into running for office. So if I'm a young Black female who wants to start a technology company and I can't get the resources and I'm really frustrated and I don't like what's happening in my community and I decide to run for office, what do I need to run a successful campaign? Financial resources. So it's all a circle and a cycle.
But do you think that, given that there's given all what's happening in social media, given the street movements, do you think there are also benefits of the decentralization of technology that we can exploit to find a loophole for people who don't have, let's say, deep pockets to run?
I would love to see, and I know that some of the younger people right now who have won, I used the example of the young man who, I wish I could say his name, he's the mayor of St. Paul in Minnesota. I met him a month ago. Young guy, 34 years old. And so we had a nice little chat, and he said one of his strategies, without question, was social media. So, when do I think that is a tool that can help and encourage people to run for office and win, and it's low cost? Of course it is. I mean, I think it is just almost brilliant next to the community outreach like what President Obama did with his whole national outreach. But they have to do it. So yes, more Black people, younger Black people need to run for office, or older Black people need to be more supportive and helpful because they have the knowledge, they have the resources, and they know what the obstacles are. So it's a hand in hand. If there was ever a time in this country's history that Black people of all ages needed to work together, it's now.
Now, I'm ask a question on that. To talk about Black people, do you see also, first of all, I'm wondering if there's really a Black agenda in the way there was a Black agenda in the 60s. In other words, does the Black Lives Matter movement constitute a 21st century version of the civil rights movement? And is that enough, or is it that too locally focused around criminal and social justice movements? What about economic justice and access to capital and things that about life? Do we have enough of a quote unquote momentum, people and organizations working in those spaces to address that very real challenge that's going to be emerging?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, that I am of that generation that was in college in the 60s. So, you know, I mean, I was there. I did all the marches and everything. So you have to, at some point, tell yourself, you know, we've spent these decades, whether it was our parents or our grandparents saying, you know, you got to do better, you have to work hard, and you need to be out there. When my generation graduated from high school, you know, you were told, or you were encouraged to go explore and to leave the nest, to leave that little block, that community that you had been in all your life, and we did. But in doing so, we lost something. So here we are now we're retiring and kind of backing off a little bit, but we really can't afford to do that because our children have grown up in a environment and in a world that everything is open and they can see it and they can feel it, and they said, oh, this is not what I want to do. We grew up in the doors were closed, be quiet, you know, liked you, but you can't do that now. You can't do that. So I think social media is helpful, but I also think that generational discussions and mentoring.
Let me pause it. So here's the concern I have. We have a plethora of media, this area of generational, intergenerational discussion, right?
Yes.
We have a plethora of media now. We have Facebook, YouTube, and a whole bunch of television stations and platforms. Yet, I have a feeling, I may be wrong, so correct me, that we don't have a media space in which we have the kind of coming together of this intergenerational dialogue.
No, we don't.
So how can we use the technologies of the future to help to strengthen that? Because if that is going to be a fault line, if young people are going to repeat the mistakes of the past because they have no time to read, no attention span, we don't have enough movies about it, or the movies are too serious, they don't want to watch them. How do we create, let's say, the narrative around the future we want with the technologies that exist and the platforms we have?
My generation cannot be afraid to reach across or down or wherever to younger generations and say, let's sit down. When you're younger and you have that moment where you're having a conversation with somebody, I'll just say in their 80s, you know, there's two ways you can look at it. You can look at it as wisdom and an opportunity to grow, or you can look at it as an older person that's just rambling on and saying nothing. And you won't get what they're saying until you get to that point in life where you said, oh my gosh, I remember talking to, you know, Mrs. Smith, who was 83 years old, and she said, you know, Linda, you need to do this, this, and this, or you need, you know, let me know how I can be helpful. Well, now Mrs. Smith is gone, and you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I should have paid more attention. So that's one piece. The other side of that is that younger people, they can't be afraid, and they need to challenge the policymakers, community leaders, the corporate execs, and everybody else. Even though I'm not going to say the Me Too generation or concept is not important, it is very important. But we need to have a Me Too generation with Black people. We need that. Our Me Too needs to be, I help somebody, I helped you know, a younger person get their company going, or a younger person who is in a position. I have a nephew that works for LinkedIn, and we talk regularly about what LinkedIn can provide that can improve our communities. I mean, that's a perfect example of technology, social media, intergenerations.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that I really want to come back to is this idea: if the National Policy Alliance is a conversation or a space for interagency or interorganizational dialogue and alliances, is the idea of creating a formal Black agenda for 2030 using for, you have a potential here. You have the UN SDGs that many countries have signed on to, including the United States. It clearly states that it's about inequality within countries, right, as a goal. Is there a way, and for the most part, even though African Americans are a developing nation within a developed country, there tends not to be a sort of linkage of these very, let's say, national and local contexts with the global context. And we do live in a global world. Do you see or foresee that in the next 2 years, we can have enough of a uptake within the elected officials that can make a difference to say, let's use this platform as an agenda?
So let me, and if I didn't know any better, I would have sworn you were sitting in my office.
I didn't hear that.
I said, if I didn't know any better, I would swear that you were like sitting in my office over the last few weeks listening to conversations.
Oh, no.
Two of the organizations within the National Policy Alliance, the World Conference of Mayors, is doing it primarily that. That's one step. Second is that Black people in Africa, Black people in the Caribbean, Black people in Canada, and Black people in the United States, absolutely, and Europe, cannot be afraid to talk to each other about business and about improving opportunities in our community. We cannot. I see it happening. I am witnessing policymakers, the business community saying, we need to be planned and ready for 2015 and 2016 and 2020 and whatever. We have to do that. We have to. And I think it's happening. May not be as open, and you may not see it as much, but it is happening.
Well, that's certainly reassuring to hear that it's happening, because one would like to think that we're not going to end up in 15 years where we are today. We're coming to the end now, and I want to ask you about the women's movement, being Women's March that has basically transformed the global landscape with the pink hat movement, the pink PP hat movement, as I call it. I love it. It's so audacious and outrageous. Now, maybe if you're Black, you might want to wear a more fuchsia shade of pink, just to kind of But as I'm saying, do you think that this woman rising, right, will make a difference in shaping the governance and policy making? So if we have more Black women at the local level, the city level, the county level, the state level, more Black women running for governor, are we likely to, even if they don't win, are we likely to see that the entrance of these new voices to the space and the national narrative making a difference in the design of these policymaking systems?
Without question, when women succeed, Black women succeed, and Black people succeed, and people of color. I don't care what movement you've looked at it, whether it's voting rights, and on and on. Everywhere in the history of this country and in the world, you see women succeed, things happen. The world changes. It is a hard push. We all know we can't back away. What is going on in this country, in this world? Yes, you are seeing more and more women running for, prime minister and presidents and whatever, and corporate CEOs. But when it happens, we also have to hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
Not back down. I'm happy you're in a particular position, but just because you're there does not guarantee you anything. It's the only thing that women are guaranteed is that we're the ones that are going to keep producing children to make the world continue on. Now, if they ever come up with a way that women don't have to have children, then the world really will change.
Well, they're working on that right now too. So as you think about the future in the year 2030 and the future of the American dream, I want you to tell me, first of all, is the dream shifting, right? In other words, can we afford to have the same level of consumption and, you know, patterns of, you know, ostentatious living, given the critical space that we are in as a planet with water and energy and minerals.
The dream has already changed. It has already changed. It changed really between my parents' generation and my generation. The what is the generation under us? The millennials. I don't think it's going to change too much with them. But that next group underneath them, yeah, they're the ones. That X and Y, they're the ones. So, you know, the millenniums are kind of just, you know, they're doing their thing and just kind of trying to stay in the same space as their parents, whatever that is. But the American dream, it had to change. Now it's about, I think we're going to go into, and my husband and I both agree with this, we're going to go into a survival mode. We're going to go into that mode of, to your point about education and skills, and I can't have the house that my parents had or my grandparents had, or if they're gone, I can't even maintain that house because I can't afford to. So yeah, it has to change. It is changing now.
So on that note, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or my favorite word, neutralistic about the future? So those are your three options: optimistic, pessimistic, or neutralistic about the future.
My heart is always optimistic. My heart has to be optimistic. My brain and reality, I'm going to say, is neutral. I refuse to be pessimistic. I refuse to. But it's we're in for a long haul. You know, I don't wish the world to have anything catastrophic happen or more catastrophic. You know, the weather, I think the weather is giving us all the messages that we need to be better humans and take care of this planet, or it won't matter.
Well, that's true. The Agenda 2030, as the UN calls it, is an agenda that talks about people, planet, and prosperity, and also peace and partnerships. And I really hope that National Policy Alliance continues to, first of all, to be a partnership of leaders, right? And that they would be more aggressive in taking on the tenets of the global space in which you're embedded, to really use the challenge of the Sustainable Development Goals and Goal 10 in particular, inequality, to shape a new future for America. So I want to thank you, Linda HAITHCOX Taylor, for sharing this time with us and having this insightful conversation about the future of America. One last question. If you had to talk about a headline from 2030, right? Based on the work you're doing now, right? You're young enough to be alive in 12 years, right?
Of course.
What is a positive affirmative headline based on the outcome of your work now that you would like to see stated in the media in 2030?
I'm going to revisit my document here. Recommendations and resolutions. And yes, two things I'm going to say is that Black unity needs to be reestablished, and it is happening. And second one, I got to throw this in, we have to be more supportive of organizations such as the NAACP, Black Lives Matter, and all the other organizations that are really trying to make a change. But the last item, if I had to have a thing, would be stop talking and prepare for action. We are doing what we said we were going to do.
And you succeeded. Okay, awesome. So that's it. From Linda HAITHCOX Taylor, she's saying, one, they will be working together. 2030 will demonstrate that they have successfully worked together since 2018 to achieve inclusive prosperity in cities and states where Blacks are in elective office in the majority, and that they have indeed put in action what they've talked about based on recommendations that have been made over the last umpteen years. Thank you so much, Linda HAITHCOX Taylor, for sharing with us your thoughts on the future of Black America and the future history of Black America 2030. So that's it, folks. I want to say it's another exciting conversation about our landscape of the future. Until next time, safe journey.
You have been listening to the Futures Forum Live online. This podcast aims to tell and share stories about the emerging future and help us better shape the future we want. The Futures Forum Live online is a production of the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get Future Sense now. Remember, our future is embedded in the landscape of the present. Share this story and share the future.